How's it going, everyone? It's me, Vivi, and welcome back. So, there's this one thing I always had in mind for quite some time now. Ever since before the release of Marvel's Spider-Man PS4, I already had this idea of a topic in mind. Not Spider-Man related, necessarily, but more centered towards Ratchet and Clank. The fate of the future of that series after Spidey's release on PS4. Now hold up, what does Spider-Man have to do with Ratchet and Clank other than, the obvious? The same developer producing these games. It's just, I mean, if you compare an IP such as Ratchet and Clank to a Marvel IP, which one is bigger? I mean, it's way too obvious. Spider-Man, of course, by a long shot. Am I sounding worried? Not at all. I don't know, some of you guys might feel that way, but no. This is more of a topic some of you might have in mind, start getting worried after the sales of Spider-Man on the PS4. It turned out to be the fastest selling PS4 exclusive of all time. The best-selling exclusive for the year 2018. It's very, very close to God of War's sales. Spider-Man ended up with more than 3.3 million copies sold, and God of War was at 3.1, and we're looking at the first 3 days of launch in the US. Now in the UK, Spidey is in second place in terms of best-selling PS4 exclusive. It's competing with FIFA 2019, but still, you gotta think about this. Marvel's Spider-Man is on one system, and yet ends up being second place. Bravo, Insomniac Games, that is a huge... Yeah, well dude, it's obvious, it's a Marvel game, it's gonna sell of course. Sure, you have a point, but we're still looking at its own universe, not based on comic books, movies, animated TV shows, it's its own universe. Insomniac Games was capable of creating one awesome Spider-Man game. Yes, it's a popular IP, I understand. Animated series, movies, but really Insomniac Games outdid themselves. I'm super happy for them for accomplishing this. If you're curious about how this whole thing happened, if Marvel approached Insomniac Games or Marvel approached Sony, well, long story short, according to community leader James Stevenson at Insomniac Games, Sony came to us and asked if we wanted to work with Marvel. Sony and Marvel let us decide what character universe we wanted to make a game based on. We chose Spider-Man. Remember that old Sucker Punch rumor, them working on a Spider-Man game? It turned out they're working on Ghost of Tsushima, another PS4 exclusive. Time flies. Now I am sure some Ratchet and Clank fans out there are happy, but worried at the same time. Like, this is probably a phrase you have in mind. I love Ratchet and Clank. Hey, since Spider-Man surpassed Ratchet and Clank, of course, in terms of sales, are they going to leave Ratchet and Clank on the back burner? Like, are they just going to focus on these bigger, first-party IPs? Absolutely not. Ratchet and Clank sells. The PS4 game proved that. I keep using that game as an example, but really, it really sold. It was their best-selling game at their studio until Spider-Man. Now you could argue, hey, wasn't Spyro the best-selling game at Insomniac Games? You could argue, but this is what James Stevenson said, that Ratchet and Clank PS4 was their best-selling game yet, until Spidey. Tell me something. Pretend you're a developer. Would you rather be known for producing multiple successful IPs or just one? One IP in the long run. I mean, long term? You have to think about its future. It's eventually going to come to an end. There's only so much one can produce on one series. Final Fantasy aside, of course, I am proud of Insomniac Games. Ratchet and Clank and Spidey are two of their most successful projects right now. If I'm mistaken, please say so in the comments. Because to me, it feels that way right now. Yes, they did originally create Spyro. Let's not forget about our little purple dragon. His existence is due to Insomniac Games. But now Spyro is under the rulership of Activision. Yes, they created Spyro, Insomniac Games originally, but that was 20 years ago. Don't forget, they also made 2 other series. We had Sunset Overdrive, a Microsoft exclusive, and 3 Resistance games. Now perhaps the next Ratchet and Clank game will take longer. I hope it does. In terms of, adding stuff to the game, spending more time on it. But here are 2 scenarios. Either because, when we're talking about the next game taking longer, they're probably just busy on other projects, or wanting to spend more time, like really spend more time. At least 2 years. to produce content for the game, polish and everything. IG has more than one team, let's not forget, 2 studios in fact. Burbank and North Carolina. Yes, one of their live streams had James Stevenson saying that the whole team is pretty much busy on Spider-Man. This was before its launch. You know, there's always NDA, they don't want to spoil or say something Sony doesn't want them to. For example, the next Ratchet & Clank game, which is inevitable. After all, Ratchet & Clank belongs to Sony. It's not Insomniac Games' IP. Considering how IG is now busy with Spider-Man DLCs, 3 DLCs in fact. Also Stormland for 2019, don't forget, they can tackle multiple projects. Yes, perhaps they were really busy on Spider-Man, like all of them, because that was their first licensed IP they were working on. A new type of game, open world, swinging around a huge city, you know. But can they handle more projects at the same time? Yes, they can. When working on Quest for Booty, for example, A Crack in Time was already in pre-production. Sunset Overdrive released in 2014, Into the Nexus, Ratchet & Clank released in 2013, Resistance 3 released in 2011, and in 2011 we had Ratchet All for One. A month and a few days later after the release of Resistance 3. But I do have one thing in mind. Yes, this is something I am worried about, which I brought up in the past. It's about the next Ratchet & Clank game, how it will turn out. It could take longer because of other projects, obviously, but I would much rather prefer if it took longer because of them wanting to take longer to produce it. I'm just hoping they don't rush it. You know, they produced a PS4 game in 10 months, don't forget. Sure, they can produce multiple games at the same time. Multiple teams, same people moving from one project to the other. But I'm just hoping they use a sufficient amount of time on the next Ratchet & Clank game. If it takes 3 years, 2 years included to, you know, develop it, maybe 1 year because of the same guys moving from one project to the other, I'm fine with that, as long as they spend sufficient time. Now, you guys might have this question in mind, would IG make another licensed game, aka Spider-Man 2? Of course, if given the opportunity. Here's a quote shared by James Stevenson. Sure, we'd be open to another licensed game. I feel like the question hints to whether there are downsides to it. It's different, of course. You have other people involved who can tell you whether something is on-brand or off-brand, which is different for us than, say, working on Ratchet & Clank. And you know what he means by this is, if we want to work on another Spider-Man game, let's say, it's a property that already exists. In short, he's saying we don't want to mess it up. As for Ratchet & Clank, it's something they created. Spider-Man has always been this huge IP which existed through TV shows, movies, comics, you get it. I already said that in the video. But I do have one last thing. Sean Layden, during a blogcast, which was around September 28th, he said that Insomniac Games was looking to make another project with PlayStation. So here's the fun part. Is it Spider-Man 2? To be honest with you, despite its huge success, it's a bit too early. New Ratchet & Clank game? Perhaps. If so, it would either be a game post Into the Nexus or a game post reimagining, also known as a reimagining of most likely going Commando. This is indeed something Insomniac Games has to decide.
Yeah, well, you know, it's an interesting dilemma because certainly with the recent PS4 game, that was sort of a reimagination of the original game.
Right.
So, you know, does one continue from the reimagination, or does one continue from Into the Nexus? You know, so.
And of course, that's assuming another game ever gets made, because none has been announced.
Look, if they do make a sequel to Into the Nexus, what about all of the newcomers? People who picked up Ratchet & Clank PS4, that being their first experience of the series. If they pick up, let's say, a sequel to Into the Nexus, they're gonna get lost. Unless Sony says yes to a remastered collection of all games onto the PS4. But usually, if let's say this new Ratchet & Clank game is a collection, Insomniac Games is not the one who makes it. They don't handle ports usually, that's something they said multiple times. But they are open to the idea of having a remastered collection. They love it, but they said we wouldn't be the ones to make it. So if we do get a reimagining of 2, I'm really curious. Like deep down, that's not what I really want to see, but if they do make it, no problem, more Ratchet & Clank. As for Sunset Overdrive 2, this was a rumor like around March and May 2018. Ted did get interviewed by IGN and said we would love to make Sunset Overdrive 2, by the way. So who knows what it could be? Wait, just hold on for a second, I'm forgetting one thing. In Spider-Man's in-game social media, a user who goes by the name IGTed, you know, the CEO of Insomnia Games, teased at a new game coming out from their team. If this is 100% true, you know, their way of teasing their next game, then it could get announced sometime this month. And I'm saying October because Spider-Man takes place in the month of October. So with that being said, guys, this is it for the video. If you want to add something to the video, feel free to share it in the comments section below. And as always, I've been Vivi, and thank you so much for watching.